Hi, and welcome to another exciting Tales from the Gulag, somewhat perhaps belated. Today is the 20th of October 2020. Is a bit of interesting stuff in those numbers, the symmetry. And here I am sitting at home with the lights behind me that I think give me some sort of a saintly kind of a halo kind of look, don't you think? But I've been prompted thinking about the CCP virus and this sort of stuff and the goings on in Victoria and other parts of the world, wondering what makes somebody like Dan Andrews tick. So for tonight, a look into the mind of Daniel Andrews. Now, I'm no psychologist. When I was studying to be a pastor of the Lutheran Church, I did have to read and study some psychology, but I count myself at best a strict layman. But I do think I have some possible insights into the mind of one who has imposed the world's harshest, most draconian lockdowns and has kept them going on for what is the world's record, even beating China. And boy, that takes some doing. And nor is it just Daniel Andrews that has imposed this outrageous stuff that even gets into unconstitutional violations of human rights. Democratic socialists around the world have gone down the path of imposing lockdowns that in many areas have nothing to do with implementing medical advice, but simply aiding the policing of the restrictions. It is well established that certain personality types lend themselves to certain occupations. This is the basis for the likes of the Briggs-Myers personality test. This test analyses an individual's personality traits and assigns them into a certain category and then uses that to suggest that they have the traits needed to do this or that kind of work. Now, I won't attempt to categorise Daniel Andrews in that way, but I think I can make some observations that I think are pretty relevant and perhaps worthwhile pondering. What traits make it likely for a person to succeed in the world of politics? As I think about it, you need to be pretty intelligent to succeed in that world. You need to be able to read people. You need to be able to quickly absorb a myriad of facts. You need to be able to think quickly on your feet. And then you need a certain level of narcissism, and you also need to be a bit sociopathic. Now, talking about these last two characteristics can have a very negative ring to them. And yes, indeed, they can be negative personal traits, because some of the most dangerous individuals in history have been narcissistic sociopaths. But they're not necessarily always that negative. Narcissism, for example, is associated with artists and entertainers. It's that trait which gives them a liking for the spotlight, which they need because that's what entertainment, show business, and the arts is all about. They need to be a bit narcissistic because that's what enables them to sell themselves and their art. Sociopathy, I hope that's the right pronunciation, is the trait of the entrepreneur. It takes someone who is willing to take risks to promote a product and put it on the marketplace to be able to do that successfully. And then I also look at how those traits have worked with some of the greatest leaders in history. I think, for example, of military commanders who were successful because they had the respect of the men underneath them. This respect was earned by things like their track record of personal bravery. That's leading by example, by displaying a concern for the well-being of their men, and in many cases by a healthy dose of self-promotion. A leader's men needed to feel that they were being led into battle by someone who was competent, who was not going to be needlessly wasteful of their lives, and this sort of confidence is not going to be fostered by somebody who is a shrinking violet. And therefore, some of these narcissistic qualities are needed to help them in their self-promotion so that through it they can help gain the confidence of their men. So it all depends, in my thinking, whether or not these qualities can be channeled into something that is positive. And to do that, they are also guided by a good moral compass. As a Christian, I would say that the true moral compass is given to us in scriptures, the Bible, and specifically in the Ten Commandments. Now, in saying that, we don't necessarily require that a good leader be a Christian as such, but to be an effective leader, you need that moral compass. Because, well, for example, the commandment to love one another is surely a quality that we can all understand, whether we are Christian or not. But you see, utopian totalitarian ideologies seem to attract narcissistic sociopaths who are not going to be guided by a proper moral compass. And these then bring out the worst that these traits have to offer. Ideologies like socialism or Nazism make people feel morally superior because, after all, they are going to try to create a better world, aren't they? And in that pursuit, all methods are acceptable because the end justifies the means, don't they? People like Daniel Andrews call themselves democratic socialists. I suggest that what drives him and his ilk is the feeling that he must always be right, even if he is wrong. The biggest appeal of socialism for such people is that it requires a belief that he, the government, knows better than anybody else. And this is why they believe in a central government that has to regulate every aspect of their citizens' life. Two other traits of the sociopath are useful in describing Daniel Andrews. That is, they are quick to blame others for their problems, and they are indifferent to the needs and sufferings of their people. I think of Hitler. In his last days, he always liked to blame the German people for his defeat. It was he who made the decisions, and yet the defeat was the fault of the generals, the soldiers, the German people, for not having the courage and the willpower needed to win the war. And therefore, his scorched earth policy, while it was proposed as a military measure against the enemy, was also a form of punishment for the German people for not measuring up to his standards of willpower. Can you see the parallel here? Andrews claimed absolute power under the guise of an emergency. He made the decisions and then blamed the Victorians for the spread of the virus. So what makes the likes of Führer Dan Andrews tick? I think he's a narcissistic sociopath who has to be right, who is quick to blame others for his failings and then punish them for his failings, all because he cares nothing about the sufferings that he inflicts on them. What a great opportunity the coronavirus has given Andrews and his kind. Daniel Andrews can say that he has listened to the experts, and therefore, to his mind, he knows better than anybody else, and so he must be free to take whatever measures he feels are needed to keep us safe. By contrast, Conservatives operate with the belief that while there are people that are going to do the wrong thing, by and large, people can exercise some common sense and by and large do what is right and useful, not only for themselves but then also for the common good, provided they are given good information and given the freedom to make the right decisions. So, when dealing with the CCP virus, there have been basically two approaches around the world. One believes that only the government can keep people safe, and so there must be heavy regulation to shut down all movement and, if necessary, all social interaction. Because people cannot be trusted to do the right thing, but they have to be regulated into it, and if they disobey, they have to be punished with harder and wider restrictions. This is very useful for someone who likes the power and has a need to feel that they are always right. The other is to give people the information that they need to keep safe, for example, to like social distancing and wash your hands. And given this, they'll be largely willing to do the right thing. Now, at first, people were reasonable enough to accept that since we didn't really know what we were dealing with, caution was a good idea. And so they were willing, by and large, to put their lives on hold and accept lockdowns for a time, so that the health system was not going to be overwhelmed, and to buy time while we worked out what we were dealing with and how we can treat it, or at least vaccinate against it. It seems to me that the results of either approach are plain to see. The biggest outbreaks and deaths seem to come from those that followed the Big Brother model of Daniel Andrews, and he cribbed his model from his bum buddies in Beijing. Others that relied on the goodwill of the people to do the right thing rather than the approach of authoritarianism and of Big Brother were also hit hard for a time at first, but they seem to have been able to get on with their lives and have developed something approaching herd immunity. The Big Brother approach of Daniel Andrews was flawed, for starters, because he was not always right. He was the guy who said that you don't need help from the Defence Force to guard the quarantine hotels. His mates in the security industry, governed by the trade unions, would do the job. In places like New York State, the Big Brother approach included the mandate that nursing homes should have to take in those that were diagnosed with the virus. Anybody with a brain the size of a chicken could tell you that this approach was going to lead to deaths. But Daniel Andrews had to be right. When the brown stuff hit the fan, he still had to be right, and so he blamed the average Victorian for wanting their freedoms, and so they had to be punished by effective martial law and the toughest lockdowns in the world. that have become more and more about controlling the population than protecting them from a medical problem. So to prove that he is right and in control, Victorians have to endure curfews, the psychological torture of prolonged solitary confinement, the banning of public gatherings, and the ban on any form of protest, unless, of course, you're protesting for Black Lives Matter. Doctors can give pills to their patients in hospital, but a priest cannot give them Holy Communion. In America, Joe Biden can have a drive-in rally in a car park where the 30 cars are sitting there listening to him speak, but a preacher doing that, having a church service, is going to be fined and or arrested. People who engage in any protest, who question in any way the wisdom of these decisions, will be arrested or fined, even if their protest is otherwise within emergency measures. Things like they're wearing the face mask, they're observing social distancing, they're not involved in some public gathering. Such measures have nothing to do with public safety and everything to do with controlling the population and eliminating dissent. It's a violation of human rights in my book, and hey, that's ultimately where socialism inevitably leads, isn't it? People must endure all of this because Daniel Andrews must always be right, and only the government knows best. And to boot, he is comforted by the thought that, after all, he is only doing this for the people's good because in his mind, only Daniel Andrews knows best. And if the people don't like it, well, it's all their fault that everything has gone belly up and they only deserve what's coming to them. So that's my insight into the mind of Daniel Andrews and many of these other leaders around the world. Thank you for watching.